What is happening, everyone? Welcome back to G-Ball Vision. Tonight we're taking a deep dive into the Oz Machine Company Roosevelt. This bad boy has a DLC-coated Magna Cut drop point bleed. You have the half moon cutout for deployment. You have these beautifully textured titanium scales that have a working finish, if I might say so myself. Almost kind of reminds me of like an acid wash. And then you have a Zirku tie, pocket clip, and a titanium backspacer, full finger choil for choke up, a very thin blade stock that comes down nice and thin. Magna Cut is a great steel for many choices, but I think it's going to be a great steel for the Rosie as well. Now, if you don't remember, this knife was sent into the channel by Jamie. So huge shout out to him for letting me check this guy out. Now, we're getting about 2 1/8 of cutting edge, about 3 inches of, blade. And then we're coming down just over 6 3/4 for the total length. We'll go ahead and get the scale out here and give this guy a little weighty check here. Zeroed out, Rosie on the tray. We got 2.95 for the weight. So this is really not a heavy knife at all. While we're checking the specs here, let's get a quick blade stock thickness here. Pretty thin, coming down around 105. So 105 thousandths, that is getting pretty thin, guys. And this edge, behind the edge, is also very, very thin. We're looking at about 9 to 10 thousandths behind the edge in that particular spot. That is, that is coming down very, very thin, guys. So what kind of size are we looking at compared to some other knives here? We got the Bug Out, which is not a big knife at all. We got the AD 20.5 there. Why don't we grab a couple of Hogues, the RSK, and we have the Deca version 2 here. Going to be quite a bit smaller than pretty much everything we're going to put on the table. The Pair 3 is going to be fairly comparable, but still it's going to be quite a bit bigger. And then if you have a PM2, PM2 is going to overshadow this guy. So it's really not a big knife at all. I got one more I won't mind checking it up against. How about the new Kubi Bluff? And it's even a touch smaller than that, handle and blade. Not much, so that is a pretty fair comparison there. But this guy is not big, and I think, some people really love that. And then some people are not the biggest fan of the size of this knife. I myself would definitely prefer something like this, but I would prefer probably a solid 3 1/4 to 3.5 inches of blade. Something that comes down around more like 8 inches overall than something that's 6 3/4. So at least another 1.25 to 1.5 inches on this guy would be spectacular for me. This size knife possibly appeals to more people just because it's not so massive, so to speak, right? It's not a code 4. It's not an 8010. It's not as substantial as that, and it's not really meant to be a substantial hard user. This is more of a gentleman's carry, EDC slicing knife. It's not a hard use work knife, beater style of knife. and the design is, it's kind of apparent. This is more of a day-to-day user that could double as a nice gent carry. It is nice and thin. It is slicey. I do like that it has the full finger choil, so I can get right up behind that edge. And because of the full finger choil, you can get right up on that tip, which I do like that and appreciate it. But it would be even better if, say, the finger choil was back here. That would be that extra inch of blade, that would be even better in my opinion. So overall, I think this is a fantastic knife. I think it's very well done. I think they are a little overpriced in my opinion. Even though everything is proper with this knife, I think they're a little overpriced. But, they have no trouble selling them. So that tells me maybe they're not overpriced. These cannot stay on the shelf for Oz Machine. So, with that being said, maybe they aren't overpriced. But in my opinion, I think they are a touch high. And maybe as time goes on, maybe they'll be able to lower the price on them a little bit, as they maybe add more models, maybe get caught up on the supply that they have. Maybe the price can drop, but the demand is so high and the supply is so low that they're kind of able to charge whatever it is they feel like charging. And it's not that they don't do a good job on their heat treats or their finishing work or their builds. I think the lockup is solid on this guy. Jamie did give me permission to check that, so we will be checking the Rosie for its lock strength there, or to see if the lock is proper. We'll also do some cutting and some carry checking. So this will carry like a basic milled clip. You'll have a little bit poking out. Goes over the seam pretty good. And like I said, you'll have a little tiny bit poking out, but that is what it is with a milled clip like this. There will always be a little bit poking out, whether the screws are hidden or whether they are showing. You're going to have a little bit sticking out. But the retention on this clip is pretty good. Pretty damn good retention on that clip. It holds the knife in there well. And you don't really have a problem getting it out of pocket either. So, that is good to go on the carry side of things. Materials wise, they nail it. Finishing work, they nail it. Action is, it drops to your thumb, 1 or 2 shakes and she's going home. The opening method is the cutout, and that works very well. You do have good access to the lock bar with a nice big chamfer on the lock bar. You got a little bit of jimping there to kind of lock you in. I like being able to lock in on top of the finger, no matter kind of where it is. That gives you a lot of control. Even if you can't grip the knife real tightly, or you got to kind of have a looser grip on it, depending on what you're doing, but it still is going to give you a lot of control being on top of your fingers like that. It's going to give you a lot of control. The blade shape, the low drop point blade, it's not extremely low. It's close to being in line with the pivot, pretty close. It's a touch high above the pivot, but still going to be a very useful drop point blade there. And then you have the belly, not a It is, I guess it is all belly, but it's not a massive belly, it is pretty much all belly to the tip, but there's going to be a lot of usable edge here as well. I don't think you're going to have a huge issue, making them longer cuts. It's not going to be as useful as something with a completely straight edge like the PM2 Warney and knives like that. But a drop point is going to be one of the most versatile blade shapes that you can get. No question about it. So what kind of edge comes on these? I don't think Jamie has used this a ton. I think he's used it some. And a little bit of cutting that I've done with it, it has done very well. It's very thin, very slicey, and that MagnaCut is treated right, so it's going to be very tough. It's going to be very corrosion resistant, especially with that coating, and it's going to hold its edge for an extended period of time. MagnaCut is a very well-rounded steel, and when you get into some more dense materials, like maybe a piece of cardboard, it should have no problem. We kind of have a double there. We can kind of see what it does with that. Goes right through. Got to put a little bit of pressure to get started, but once it gets going, it goes right through it. No problem as I knock the camera around. And then for the precision cuts, you are going to be up. If you have a detailed cut or a precision cut to make, unless you can use that belly, you're going to be up pretty high with that tip. Now, some people that might not be an issue, and then I've seen some people say they don't like how high the tip is and how much belly there is, so it's really going to be dependent on what your personal preference is, but it's a pretty good cutter, and the geometry of this blade is really going to help with that. So how about Lockup here? Why don't we check that? I think this is pretty solid. The Lockup is about 30% or so, roughly. Yeah, the Lockup is solid on this guy. There's no play. There's no up and down, no side to side. There's no detent lash. So this guy is, for all intents and purposes, a solid knife. You have good geometry. You have a good steel with a good heat treat. You have good handle materials, solid lockup, good access to that lock bar. I mean, they have a great design here. So, you know, if this is something that is appealing to you and you have the money to cover a knife like this, then I see no issues with it. I would prefer something more of an XL size to this, but I could definitely see this being a phenomenal secondary carry or a fifth pocket knife. It really and still reminds me of a nimble in a sense. It's very reminiscent of a nimble to me, at least the way it feels in hand. Now, the tip on a nimble is a little bit lower, but as far as feel in hand and all that sort of thing, that's just what it reminds me of. I'm not saying, you know, anyone else sees that or feels that, but with the full finger choil, the drop point blade, it just feels in hand like a nimble. I'm not saying they are copies of each other or anything like that. Just feel in hand. That's what I think is the closest relatable knife to this, especially dealing with size. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the Rosie. Have you had one? Are they not your cup of tea? Let me know. I love hearing from you guys. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button before you head out. If you're new to the channel or you've been here before, hit the subscribe button down below. I would love to have you here. Otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.